At the county fair, a fortune teller grabbed my wrist and whispered, "You're not supposed to be alive." Excuse me? I tried to pull away, but she held firm. 3 years ago. The accident on Route 67. You died. Her milky eyes bore into mine. But here you are. My blood went cold. I had been in an accident on Route 67 3 years ago. Bad one. My car wrapped around a tree. But I'd walked away with just bruises. Look, I don't know what game you're playing. She pressed an envelope into my hand. Thick, brown, sealed with old tape. Heavy. Give this to your girlfriend. Don't open it until you're home. Both of you together. I don't have a girlfriend. Stephanie, the nurse. 6 months now. She smiled, revealing yellow teeth. She's waiting for this. I hadn't told anyone about Stephanie. We'd kept it quiet because she worked at the hospital where my mom was treated. The fortune teller released my wrist, leaving red marks. They're already watching, she whispered, glancing outside her tent. Started the moment you walked in here. Go now. Straight home. Don't stop. I stumbled out of the tent, envelope burning in my hand. The fairground suddenly felt different. A man by the cotton candy stand watched me over his newspaper. When I made eye contact, he spoke into an earpiece. A woman with a stroller turned away when I looked at her. The stroller was empty. 2 teenagers stopped their conversation as I passed, one photographing me with his phone. My heart hammered. I walked faster. In the parking lot, I fumbled for my keys. A couple leaning against a pickup truck straightened up when they saw me. The woman whispered something into her phone. The man moved to block my path to my car, then pretended to tie his shoe. I circled around him, jumped in, locked the doors. My hands shook as I started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw the couple getting into separate vehicles. I drove out carefully, checking my mirrors. Normal traffic at first. Then I noticed the blue sedan. 3 cars back, but matching every turn. When I changed lanes, it changed lanes. When I slowed down, it slowed down. Another car joined. Silver SUV. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The sedan moved up to 2 cars back. The SUV switched to the left lane, boxing me in. My phone buzzed. Stephanie. Where are you? We need to talk. I texted back at a red light. Coming home. Fair was weird. Fortune teller gave me something for you. Her response was instant. Don't come home. Meet me at the old water tower. Now. Something was wrong. Stephanie never knew about the water tower. That was where I'd gone after the accident 3 years ago. Where I'd sat for hours, trying to understand how I'd survived. The light turned green. I pulled forward. Blue and red lights exploded in my mirror. But I hadn't been speeding. Hadn't done anything wrong. I pulled over, hands shaking. The sedan and SUV pulled over too, staying about 50 yards back. Waiting. A 3rd car appeared. Black town car with tinted windows. It parked ahead of me. The cop approached slowly. Young guy, hand on his weapon. I kept my hands visible on the wheel. License and registration. I complied, trying to stay calm. He studied my ID for a long time. Too long. Speaking quietly into his radio, but I couldn't make out the words. Where are you coming from? County fair. Alone? Yeah. He shined his flashlight into the back seat. The beam stopped on the envelope sitting on the passenger seat. His entire body tensed. What's in the envelope? I don't know. Someone gave it to me. For my girlfriend. His demeanor shifted. Cold now. Professional. I'm going to need you to open that envelope and hand it to me. Do you have a warrant or... Open the envelope. Now. His hand moved to his weapon. My phone buzzed. Stephanie, I'm sorry I had to do this. Another text. They said it was the only way to fix what happened 3 years ago. With trembling fingers, I tore open the envelope. I kept my eyes on the cop, didn't look inside, and handed it over. The cop looked inside and his face hardened. But there was something else there too. Recognition. He'd been expecting this. Step out of the vehicle. Slowly. What? Why? You're under arrest for possession of crystal methamphetamine and criminal proceeds. He pulled out his cuffs. Turn around, hands behind your back. That's not mine. Someone gave that to me. I didn't even know. Save it. As he cuffed me, I saw inside the envelope he'd placed on my car hood. Bags of blue crystals, rolls of cash, but underneath, a photograph. Old and faded. It was me, at the accident scene 3 years ago. But I wasn't alone in the photo. There were other bodies. 3 of them, covered in sheets. The cop saw me looking, leaned in close. Those bodies were never supposed to be found like that. The words hit me like ice water. He grabs my arm and walks me to his patrol car while my legs feel like they might give out. The suited man stands by the black town car 50 yards up, watching us with no expression on his face. He doesn't move or gesture, just watches. The blue sedan and silver SUV pull away slowly from where they'd been waiting. Their job done now that I'm in cuffs. Dodson opens the back door and guides my head down as I slide into the seat. The door slams, and I'm alone with the smell of old vinyl and cleaning chemicals. Through the metal grate, I watch him talk on his radio, his mouth moving, but I can't hear the words. The drive to the station takes maybe 15 minutes, but feels like hours. My wrists ache from the cuffs. Every bump in the road makes my stomach turn. At the police station, they walk me through a side entrance into a bright hallway that smells like floor wax and coffee. The booking officer is a heavy guy with a gray mustache who processes me like I'm a grocery order. He takes my wallet, phone, keys, watch. Everything goes into a plastic bag. He rolls my fingers across an ink pad and presses them onto cards, one finger at a time. Left thumb, left index, left middle. The ink stains my skin black. He positions me in front of a height chart and takes my photo while I hold a number placard. The flash makes me blink. Dodson stands nearby the whole time, avoiding eye contact and speaking quietly into his radio. Package secured, he says. Target is contained. My phone sits in the evidence bag on the counter, and I can see Stephanie's last text still glowing on the locked screen before it goes dark. I'm sorry I had to do this. The booking officer types information into his computer with 2 fingers, hunting and pecking each key. He asks my address, my date of birth, my social security number. I answer automatically while my brain tries to process what's happening. They lead me down another hallway to the holding cells. Concrete benches line the walls. A steel toilet sits in the corner with no privacy. The door clangs shut behind me and I'm alone. I sit on the bench and stare at the small window in the door. Through it, I can see down the hall to an office with glass walls. Dodson walks in there about an hour later, and the suited man is already waiting. They talk for maybe 20 minutes. The suited man does most of the talking, gesturing with his hands while Dodson nods and occasionally makes defensive gestures. Their body language is clear even from this distance. The suited man is in charge. Dodson is following orders. I realized this traffic stop was planned long before I ever went to that fair. They knew I'd be there. They knew I'd get that envelope. They set the whole thing up. My mind keeps going back to that photograph. 3 bodies under sheets. Me standing there at the accident scene. I walked away with bruises while 3 people died. How did I not know? How did I never see the other car? The crash plays in my head on repeat, but it's all fragments. Glass breaking. The tree filling my windshield. Silence. Then paramedics and flashing lights. I never saw bodies. Never heard about fatalities. Just went home and tried to forget it happened. Dodson comes back with another cop around hour 3. They unlock my cell and walk me to a small room with a metal table and recording equipment mounted on the wall. The recorder's red light blinks on. Dodson sits across from me and asks where I got the drugs. I tell him a fortune teller gave me an envelope. He asks who gave me the envelope. I tell him again, an old woman at the fair. He asks if I knew what was inside. I say no. He asks about my girlfriend. I tell him I don't know why she texted me. He carefully avoids any mention of the photograph or Route 67. When I try to bring up the accident, he cuts me off fast. We're here to discuss the narcotics possession charge, he says. Nothing else. The interview lasts maybe 30 minutes. They take me back to the cell. Around hour 5, a woman shows up. She's young, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back and a briefcase that's seen better days. Public defender, she says through the scratched plexiglass in the consultation room. Melanie Swift. The room smells like industrial cleaner, the kind that burns your nose. She flips through my file while explaining that possession with that amount could mean serious prison time. 3 to 5 years minimum. My best move is to say absolutely nothing until arraignment. Don't talk to anyone. Don't answer questions. Just wait. Her advice offers some hope, but the dread in my gut tells me this is way bigger than a drug charge. She leaves after 20 minutes. They take me back to the cell. Night comes. The fluorescent lights stay on. I lie on the concrete bench and stare at the ceiling tiles. Sleep won't come. My mind replays the Route 67 crash in fragments I've spent 3 years trying to forget. The sound of glass breaking, the tree trunk filling my windshield, the impact, the silence after, then walking away with just bruises while emergency lights painted everything red and blue. Those bodies under sheets in the photo won't stop appearing behind my eyelids. 3 people died that night and I never knew. Never saw the other car, never heard about fatalities. The fortune teller showed me that envelope and suddenly there were bodies I never knew existed. Morning comes. They take me to arraignment in a crowded courtroom that smells like old wood and too many people. I stand before a judge who looks tired and annoyed. The prosecutor asks for $50,000 bail. Melanie argues it down. The judge sets bail at $15,000 with conditions. Surrender my passport. Submit to random drug testing. My savings can just barely cover the bond. The judge warns me that any violation or failure to appear will result in immediate arrest and revocation. I nod. The whole thing takes maybe 10 minutes. I post bail through a bondsman who takes my information like he's processing a grocery order. Name, address, social security, employer. He barely looks at me. By early afternoon, I'm released with a court date 3 weeks away. My car is impounded as evidence, so I call a rideshare. During the drive home, I spot the blue sedan parked 2 blocks from the station. It follows us at a distance, not even trying to hide anymore. The driver stays 3 or 4 cars back but matches every turn. Getting out of jail doesn't mean I'm free. At home, I search every room. I check under furniture, inside vents, behind picture frames, looking for cameras or tracking devices or anything that proves someone's been here. The search finds nothing concrete, but the apartment feels wrong. Violated. Even though nothing looks disturbed, I can feel that someone's been through my things. I keep returning to that photograph in my mind. Me at the accident scene with 3 covered bodies. Bodies I never knew existed until yesterday. My hands won't stop shaking. I try to think through what happened 3 years ago and why someone is framing me now. My phone buzzes. Voicemail from an unknown number. I play it. A hushed voice says only 10 words. Don't text her. They read everything. If you want truth, stop using your phone. The line goes dead. I stare at my phone wondering who's watching my messages and how deep this goes. I pull the battery out and sit in my dark living room, trying to think clearly about what to do next. Late that night, I grab my keys and drive to the old water tower on the edge of town. The roads are empty except for occasional semi-trucks heading toward the interstate. I take the back way to avoid main streets where cameras might track me. The water tower sits on a hill overlooking Route 67, and I park in the same spot I used 3 years ago when I came here after the accident. The metal structure looms above me, rusted and covered in graffiti. I climb out and sit on the hood of my car. The night is quiet except for distant highway traffic, a constant hum that never stops. I force myself to walk through every moment I can remember from that night. I was leaving a friend's house around midnight. The roads were wet from earlier rain. I was driving Route 67 because it was faster than taking the interstate. I remember the curve near mile marker 34. I remember seeing headlights in my mirror. Then the impact, the sound of glass breaking, the tree trunk filling my windshield, the airbag hitting my face, then silence, then standing beside my destroyed car while paramedics asked me questions I couldn't answer. I never saw the other car, never saw bodies, never knew anyone died until that photograph showed me 3 people under sheets. The gap in my memory bothers me more now than it did 3 years ago. What happened between the impact and standing outside my car? How long was I unconscious? Why can't I remember those minutes? Back home the next morning, I'm searching through drawers looking for anything that might help me understand what's happening. I pull open my nightstand drawer and find Stephanie's hospital access badge wedged behind some old receipts. The badge has her photo and employee number printed on white plastic. The discovery hits me hard because it means she's been here recently, probably while I was at the fair. I realized the feeling that someone had been through my apartment wasn't paranoia. She had access to my place. She knew my schedule. She could have planted anything or taken anything without me knowing. I hold the badge and wonder what else she left behind or removed. I search the rest of the apartment more carefully, checking under the mattress, inside closets, behind furniture. Nothing else seems out of place, but the violation feels complete now. My phone buzzes with a text from Stephanie's number. I pick it up expecting another apology. Instead, the message reads different. Clinical and cold. The text says she took personal leave and I shouldn't try to contact her and this is her supervisor. I read it 3 times. The tone doesn't sound like Stephanie at all. The fact that someone else is using her phone sends alarm bells through my head. Either way, the hospital knows about us now. They know about whatever role she played in this setup. I try calling the number, but it goes straight to voicemail. I don't leave a message. I turn on the local news and see a brief story about a narcotics task force conducting an ongoing operation in the area. The anchor talks about several arrests related to drug trafficking. The background footage shows the county fairground with blurred images of vendor tents. I lean closer to the screen. One of the tents looks exactly like where the fortune teller gave me that envelope. The camera pans across the midway, and I recognize the cotton candy stand where the man with the newspaper was watching me. The fair wasn't random chance. It was a carefully chosen location where they could watch me in public without raising suspicion. The news anchor mentions the task force has been working for months on this operation. I wonder how many other people got envelopes that day. How many other setups were happening while I walked through those crowds thinking I was just having a normal afternoon. Melanie calls and asks me to come to her office that afternoon. When I arrive, she looks more serious than during our jail meeting. She spreads out paperwork across her desk showing the charges against me carry a minimum of 3 years if convicted. The documents have legal language I barely understand, but the numbers are clear. 3 to 5 years in prison. Mandatory minimum sentencing. No early release options. She warns me in clear terms that I cannot do any investigating on my own or contact potential witnesses. Her message is obvious even though she phrases it carefully. Stay quiet. Follow the rules. Maybe we can negotiate a plea deal. But if I go poking around, I'll make everything worse. I nod and tell her I understand. I'm lying. She knows I'm lying. But she has to tell me anyway because that's her job. I spend that evening at the public library using their computer to search for the Route 67 accident. I find the initial police report through a public records portal. The report is dated 3 years ago and lists basic information about the crash. 2 vehicles involved, 3 fatalities in the other vehicle. Pending toxicology screen on all drivers. Investigation ongoing. But there's no final report posted anywhere. I search for follow-up documents or case closure forms. Nothing appears in the public record. The tox screen results that should have cleared me or implicated me never showed up in any official capacity. I realize someone made sure those results stayed buried. The investigation status still says ongoing even though 3 years have passed. I print the report using coins from my pocket and fold the pages into my jacket. Another voicemail comes through on my phone. I play it in my car before driving home. The same hushed voice from before directs me to a specific EMS run sheet number from the night of the accident. The voice tells me to request it through the state records portal. I write down the number on the back of my library receipt. That night, I submit the request online claiming I need it for insurance purposes. The automated system responds saying I'll receive a response within 10 business days. Someone is feeding me breadcrumbs. Each piece of information leads to another question. I don't know if they're trying to help me or lead me into a trap. The pattern feels deliberate, too organized to be random tips, but I follow the trail anyway because I don't have other options. While waiting for the EMS records, I dig through old mail stacked in a box under my bed. I find an insurance claim letter from 3 years ago. The letter is from my auto insurance company explaining the final determination on the Route 67 accident. The key phrase jumps out at me. No liability assigned due to inconclusive evidence. I remember being told the accident was clearly not my fault, that road conditions and the other driver's speed were factors, that I shouldn't worry about being blamed. Now I'm seeing the official record was far less certain. The word inconclusive bothers me. What evidence was inconclusive? Why didn't anyone follow up with me about it? The letter suggests the investigation couldn't determine fault, which contradicts everything I was told at the time. I pull out my mom's hospital billing records from her treatment 2 years ago. I'm looking for anything connected to Stephanie or the dates around the accident. The billing statements are thick stacks of paper with codes I don't understand. One line item catches my attention. A charge dated the night of the crash. The billing code says specimen handling, but the nurse signature block is blank instead of showing a name. Every other line item has a signature or employee number. This one is empty. I realize this might be connected to the missing tox screen results. My mom was in the hospital the same night I had the accident. The timing can't be coincidence. But I don't understand how her treatment intersects with my accident investigation. The blank signature suggests someone deliberately left their name off the paperwork. The state portal finally delivers my own ER chart from 3 years ago. I open the PDF with shaking hands. Most of it looks routine. Vital signs, physical exam notes, treatment for minor lacerations and bruising. Then I see the toxicology screen section. The status reads canceled with a note saying specimen compromised. There's no explanation of how or why the sample was ruined. No follow-up testing ordered. No documentation of what compromised means. This means there's no official record of whether I was sober that night. Without that evidence, the inconclusive finding makes terrible sense. It also leaves me vulnerable to any narrative someone wants to create. They can claim I was impaired and there's no lab work to prove otherwise. The missing tox screen isn't an accident or bureaucratic error. Someone deliberately made sure that evidence disappeared. I pulled up my old insurance paperwork and found the tow company invoice with a name and number. The next morning I called and asked for Derek Lambert. He agreed to meet me at a diner off Route 67 that afternoon. I drove out there early and sat in a booth by the window watching trucks roll past on the highway. Derek showed up right on time, a guy in his 60s with weathered hands and a direct way of talking. I explained I was looking into my accident from 3 years back and needed to understand the timeline. He stirred his coffee and frowned when I asked about how long it took to tow my car. He said they were told to wait 90 minutes before touching the vehicle. The cops said don't touch it until someone else arrived. He'd never seen that before on a regular accident, but they did what the police told them. I felt my stomach drop because 90 minutes meant someone had plenty of time to access my car before it became official evidence. I asked Derek if he remembered anything unusual about the scene when he finally got there. He thought for a moment and said the driver's side was barely damaged, which matched my memory of walking away without serious injuries. But then he mentioned the debris pattern looked weird, like stuff had been moved around. I thanked him and left the diner with my hands shaking. The accident scene was tampered with before anyone documented it properly. Back home, I dug through my phone records from 3 years ago and found my rideshare history. I located the driver who picked me up from the hospital the night after the crash and called her number. She remembered me right away because I was so quiet and looked like I'd seen a ghost. She said I seemed completely sober and just in shock. I was clean and polite and kept apologizing for nothing. Her memory gave me a small moment of relief, a reminder that I wasn't drunk or high that night, just unlucky and traumatized. I submitted a public records request through the city portal for fairgrounds CCTV footage from the day I got the envelope. 2 days later, a clerk called me back sounding nervous and uncomfortable. She told me that federal holds had been placed on certain timestamps from that day. I couldn't access the footage without a court order or federal clearance. The fact that federal agencies were blocking access confirmed this was much bigger than a local drug bust. I'd stumbled into something that was planned and executed at a much higher level than I'd imagined. My phone rang, and Melanie's name appeared on the screen. She wanted me to come to her office immediately for an emergency meeting. I drove over there and sat across from her while she looked genuinely worried. She warned me that my bail could be revoked if the prosecution found out I was contacting witnesses and requesting records. She told me I was risking everything by investigating on my own. I lied straight to her face and promised I'd stop. The conflict between protecting myself legally and finding the truth was pulling me apart, but I couldn't stop now when I was finally getting real answers. That afternoon, I looked out my window and saw the blue sedan parked 3 houses down with a clear view of my front door. I grabbed my phone and took a photo of the license plate. I ran the number through an online lookup service, and it dead-ended at government pool vehicle with restricted information. The confirmation that federal or state agents were actively watching me made me feel both right about my paranoia and completely helpless against forces I couldn't fight. The EMS run sheet finally arrived in my email, and I opened it with my heart pounding hard. I read through the medical shorthand and technical language. The report noted that I was ambulatory and alert and refused transport. The other vehicle had 3 DOA pronounced on scene. The cold, clinical words made the deaths real in a way they never were before. I sat at my kitchen table staring at DOA and trying to understand how I survived while 3 other people died. An anonymous email arrived in my inbox with a compressed folder attached. I downloaded it carefully and opened the files. Inside were dozens of photos from the fairground taken from different angles. The images showed me walking through the fair, approaching the fortune teller's tent, and leaving with the envelope. Everything was captured by what looked like professional surveillance equipment. One photo showed the fortune teller greeting me, while someone behind me was photographing the whole interaction. Every moment of that day was documented by multiple people watching me. Through a friend of a friend, I got connected to an investigative journalist named Aurora Barker. She'd been tracking hospital theft and law enforcement information leaks. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and she was sharp and skeptical from the start. She asked me detailed questions about the timeline and the evidence I'd collected. When I mentioned Stephanie's role and the hospital connection, her eyes got wider and more focused. She told me she'd been investigating suspicious patterns in specimen handling at that exact hospital. Aurora pulled out her laptop and showed me her research. A narcotics unit had been using planted evidence to force cooperation from low-risk witnesses in larger investigations. She suspected Stephanie was pressured into participating by threats to her job or nursing license. The envelope I received was meant to give them power over me for some reason, connected to Route 67. The information made me feel protective of Stephanie despite what she'd done to me. I understood she was trapped in the same system that was crushing me now. That afternoon, I drove back to the water tower with my phone's recording app open on the passenger seat. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the same spot where I'd sat 3 years ago, trying to understand how I survived. I grabbed my phone and started walking the perimeter of the tower, speaking my memory of the accident out loud. I described leaving my friend's house around 11, the empty stretch of Route 67, the way the other car appeared in my headlights. I talked through the impact, how it felt on the passenger side of my car, the tree trunk filling my windshield, the silence after. I kept recording for 20 minutes, circling the tower twice while forcing myself to remember every detail I'd spent years trying to forget. When I played it back, one thing jumped out at me. I remembered the impact being on the passenger side, metal crushing inward from the right, but the police report said front-end collision. I stopped the recording and pulled up the report on my phone, reading the technical language again. Front-end impact with tree, driver's side minimal damage. The description didn't match my memory at all. These small differences might mean nothing, or they might mean everything about what really happened that night. I was getting back in my car when Knuckles rapped on my window. A man in jeans and a polo shirt stood there, badge clipped to his belt. I rolled down the window halfway, keeping my hands visible. He leaned down and spoke quietly. His name was Raphael Knox, Internal Affairs and State Investigations. He told me if I wanted the truth about Route 67, I should stop talking to the narcotics guys and talk to him instead. His approach felt risky, standing out here in the open where anyone could see us. That made me think he was either genuinely trying to help or setting up an even more complicated trap than the one I was already in. Raphael gestured to his car parked 50 yards away, a plain sedan with tinted windows. We walked over and got in, him in the driver's seat, me in the passenger seat. He pulled out a folder and showed me Officer Dodson's service record. Clean on paper, commendations for drug interdictions, solid arrest record. Then Raphael flipped to another page showing a list of seizures over the past 2 years. Dodson's name appeared on 6 of them, all involving confidential informants, all resulting in major drug recoveries. Raphael explained that IA had been building a case against the narcotics unit's practices for 8 months. My arrest fit a pattern they'd been documenting, where low-risk targets got hit with planted evidence to create leverage for bigger investigations. Raphael's information gave me a thread of hope that someone in law enforcement actually cared about the truth, but I stayed careful, remembering what Dodson had done to me and how easily cops could lie. Raphael asked if I'd be willing to wear a wire for a meeting with Dodson or the suited handler from the Blacktown car. He said it could get me a better deal on my charges, maybe even get them dropped entirely. I refused immediately, shaking my head. I told him I needed to think about it and talk to my lawyer first. The idea of becoming an active informant scared me more than the drug charges. Raphael nodded like he'd expected that answer and pulled out a business card. The number on it wasn't connected to any official police line, he said, just his personal cell. He told me to call when I was ready to talk more, then we both got out of his car and went our separate ways. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, searching online for hospital HR complaints. I typed in the hospital name and filtered by dates around my accident. One grievance popped up from 3 years ago, filed by a lab tech about night shift specimen mishandling. The complaint mentioned samples being lost or compromised and named a supervisor who was later quietly transferred to another facility. I clicked through to the supervisor's name and found she'd been moved to a different hospital 6 months after my accident. The missing tox screen wasn't an isolated incident. Someone at that hospital had been tampering with evidence in a pattern, and my accident just happened to coincide with their operation. I tracked down Derek Lambert's number again and called him the next morning. We met at the same diner off Route 67, and I bought him coffee while asking about the cops who made him wait before towing my car. Derek leaned back in the booth and spoke carefully. He said they waited because someone told them another person needed to check the scene first, someone from a different agency. When I pressed him on who, he shrugged and said it was above his pay grade. The whole thing felt wrong to him at the time, but tow operators don't question cops. His confirmation that outside agencies were involved from the start made me certain the accident was never properly investigated. Someone with authority had controlled the scene before any official documentation happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Aurora. She'd secured pieces of the fairground CCTV footage through a clerk contact who owed her a favor. I drove to her apartment that afternoon, and we sat on her couch watching grainy video on her laptop. The footage showed me walking through the fair in segments. The couple at the pickup truck tracked my movement in one clip. The teenagers photographed me in another. The woman with the empty stroller turned to follow me in a third clip. The coordination was obvious and professional, multiple watchers positioned throughout the fairground. Aurora froze the frame on the suited man standing beside the black town car, his face partially visible. She said she'd try to run facial recognition through her journalist contacts. Back home that evening, I searched news archives for Officer Dodson's name. 2 previous high-profile drug busts came up, both from the past 18 months. The first involved a meth lab operation with 3 arrests and $200,000 in seized narcotics. The second was a fentanyl trafficking ring with 5 arrests and $500,000 in drugs and cash. Both cases involved confidential informants whose names were redacted. Both resulted in convictions. The articles made Dodson look like a competent cop doing solid police work, but knowing what I knew now, I wondered how many of those busts involved planted evidence and coerced witnesses. I wondered if Dodson was a willing participant in corruption, or just following orders from someone above him. Late that night, paper slid under my apartment door. I heard footsteps retreating down the hallway and jumped up to look, but whoever delivered it was already gone. I picked up the folded note and opened it. The handwriting was shaky and uncertain. The message said the writer was paid to give me the envelope, and that they were being watched too. An apology followed. A phone number was written at the bottom. I recognized the handwriting style as probably belonging to the fortune teller from the fair. My anger at being manipulated faded into understanding. She was another pawn in this operation, probably threatened or paid to play her role just like Stephanie had been. I drove to a convenience store and bought a burner phone with cash. Back in my car, I called the number from the note. It rang twice and connected. The voice that answered wasn't the same as the anonymous tipster from before. This voice was cold and official, speaking in clipped sentences. The person told me my girlfriend already gave them what they needed. They said I should stop digging or the deal they offered her would disappear. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat holding the phone while my mind raced through what this meant. Stephanie had cut some kind of deal with these people. My investigation was threatening whatever agreement they'd made with her. The warning was clear, but I couldn't stop now when I was finally getting close to understanding what really happened 3 years ago on Route 67. That night I pulled up an old car forum where I'd posted photos 3 years ago, back when I was trying to make sense of surviving the crash. I scrolled through my profile until I found the thread, and there they were, 6 images of my destroyed car taken from different angles at the impound lot. I opened each photo in a new tab and studied them carefully, zooming in on the damage patterns. The driver's side door was dented but intact, the window cracked but not shattered. The steering wheel showed no signs of airbag deployment on my side. The front end was crumpled but not as badly as I remembered, more like a hard impact than a death trap collision. I pulled up the police report on my other monitor and read the description again. Front-end collision, severe structural damage, multiple fatalities in second vehicle. But my photos showed the passenger side took most of the impact, not the front. The tree trunk had hit at an angle, catching the right side of my car and spinning it. These photos contradicted the official story, and I realized my own documentation from 3 years ago might be the most reliable evidence I had, because I took them before anyone could tell me what to remember. Aurora texted me the next morning asking if I was ready to meet someone who'd been asking questions about Route 67 for years. We arranged to meet at Riverside Park that afternoon, and I got there early, sitting on a bench near the playground while kids screamed on the swings. A woman in her 40s approached, and Aurora introduced her as the sister of one of the people who died that night. Her name was Karen, and she had tired eyes and a folder of documents she'd collected over 3 years of trying to get answers. We sat at a picnic table while she spread out police reports, death certificates, and letters from lawyers who'd taken her money and delivered nothing. She told me the official story never made sense because her brother was driving home from work, sober and careful, and the accident report made it sound like he caused the crash. She'd been stonewalled every time she asked for the full investigation file, told it was closed and nothing more could be done. When I showed her the photos from my forum post, her hands shook. She pointed at the damage patterns and said that matched what the tow operator told her years ago, that the scene looked weird and didn't match the paperwork. I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders, knowing I had to find the truth not just for myself, but for Karen and the other families who lost someone that night. She wasn't angry at me, just desperate for answers, and I promised I'd share whatever I learned. I called Melanie that evening and told her about the photos and the meeting with Karen. She was quiet for a long time, and I could hear her tapping a pen against her desk. Finally, she said we needed to meet in person to discuss strategy. The next morning, I sat in her small office while she reviewed the ER chart redactions and the EMS run sheet I'd collected. She was nervous about sharing these documents with Raphael and Aurora, worried it could backfire if the prosecution found out. But she also admitted it was a measured risk that might give us leverage in plea negotiations, especially if we could prove the evidence against me was planted as part of a larger cover-up. She drafted a limited release form that would protect me legally while allowing Raphael and Aurora to investigate the accident and hospital connections. I signed it carefully, reading every line twice. Melanie made copies and sealed them in separate envelopes addressed to Raphael and Aurora. As I left her office, I felt like I was taking control of the narrative instead of just reacting to what other people did to me. It was the first proactive decision I'd made since this whole thing started, and it felt both scary and right. That afternoon, I spotted the blue sedan parked 2 blocks from my apartment, and something in me snapped. I got in my car and decided to follow it instead of being followed. I pulled out slowly and circled the block, coming up behind the sedan from a side street. The driver didn't react at first, just pulled away from the curb like normal. I stayed 3 cars back, trying to look casual, but at the second intersection, the sedan made a sudden right turn without signaling. I followed. The driver led me through a maze of residential streets, turning randomly, doubling back, making it obvious he knew I was there. After 20 minutes of pointless loops, I gave up and headed home. That evening, my phone rang and Melanie's voice was tight with anger. The prosecution had filed a motion suggesting I was violating bail conditions by harassing law enforcement. Someone had reported my attempt to follow the surveillance car, and now they were using it against me. I felt cornered between my need to investigate and the legal system trying to shut me down. Melanie told me in clear terms that I couldn't do anything like that again, that I needed to be much more careful about my next moves. I agreed, but inside I was frustrated because every time I tried to find answers, someone pushed back harder. The next day, a notification popped up on my phone from an app I didn't recognize. When I opened it, there was a message from Raphael using some kind of secure messaging system. He said we needed to talk about a formal cooperation agreement. I called him from the app and he explained what a proffer was, a deal where I'd get limited immunity for statements about the accident cover-up, but not for the drug possession charge. The agreement would protect me from self-incriminating while letting me share everything I'd learned with internal affairs. But it also meant committing to work with IA and potentially testifying against other cops if the investigation led to charges. The deal was tempting because it gave me legal protection while helping expose the truth. But it also meant stepping into the middle of a fight between different parts of law enforcement, and I didn't know who I could really trust. Raphael didn't push, just said I should think about it carefully and talk to Melanie. I told him I needed 24 hours to decide. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone, weighing the risks of cooperation against the risks of staying silent. Aurora called me that night and said she had something I needed to hear. I drove to her apartment and she had her laptop set up with headphones ready. She played me a recorded phone call, and I heard a woman's voice that sounded clinical and cold. The woman was pressuring someone about a specimen that needed to disappear, making sure the paperwork showed it was compromised during handling. The voice was threatening in a quiet way, talking about consequences for the nurse's career if the specimen didn't get lost properly. When the recording ended, Aurora told me the woman was Helen Stinson, a hospital supervisor whose name appeared in the HR complaint I'd found. I felt protective fury rise in my chest because Stephanie had probably received calls exactly like this, threats wrapped in professional language. This recording proved the specimen tampering wasn't accidental or isolated, it was intentional and systematic. Aurora said her source got the recording through a hospital employee who was tired of covering up problems. I asked if we could use it as evidence and she said maybe, but it depended on how it was obtained and whether Raphael's investigation could make it admissible. Either way, it was proof that someone at that hospital had been tampering with evidence for years. My phone buzzed later that night with a text from Stephanie's number. The message said, "Meet me where we said, please, I need to explain." I stared at the words, my heart hammering. The message was referring to the water tower, the place I'd mentioned in texts before I knew they were being monitored. I was torn between hope that Stephanie was actually reaching out and fear that this was another trap. But I needed to hear her side directly, needed to understand why she'd done what she did. I texted Raphael through the secure app and told him where I was going and why. He responded quickly, telling me to be careful and keep my phone on. I drove to the water tower as the sun was setting, parking in the gravel lot where I'd sat 3 years ago trying to process my survival. Stephanie's car pulled in 10 minutes later, and she looked exhausted through the windshield. I got into her passenger seat, and we sat in silence for a moment before she started talking. Stephanie told me everything through tears that wouldn't stop. She said the narcotics unit approached her at work 2 months ago and told her they were investigating drug trafficking connected to the hospital. They knew about us, knew about my accident, knew things about Route 67 that weren't in any public record. They told her I was in danger of being charged with something much bigger related to the accident, and the only way to protect me was to cooperate with their sting operation. They wanted her to steer me toward the fair and make sure I got the envelope, said it would give them evidence to arrest the real criminals. She thought she was helping me by going along with their plan, They promised her nothing would happen to me, that I'd be safe if she just did what they asked. But when I got arrested anyway, she realized she'd been lied to. She'd been manipulated into setting me up, and by the time she understood what was really happening, it was too late. Her explanation didn't erase the betrayal I felt, but looking at her face, I understood she was another victim in this operation. She'd been used just like the fortune teller, just like me, all of us pawns in someone else's game. Stephanie pulled out her phone with shaking hands and showed me a photo she'd taken before they confiscated her device. The image showed a training binder lying open on a desk, and I could see a label on one of the page dividers. Route 67, do not disclose. Officer Dodson's name was written on the binder cover. She said she saw it during one of her debriefings with the narcotics unit, when they were explaining how the operation would work. She'd managed to snap the photo quickly before anyone noticed. The fact that this photo existed in official police materials meant the cops had been sitting on evidence about the accident for 3 years. They had documentation they'd deliberately kept hidden, proof that what happened that night wasn't what they'd told everyone. Stephanie said the photo in the envelope I received came from that same binder, that they'd used official evidence to set me up. I finally had concrete proof of a deliberate cover-up, something that showed this went beyond planted drugs into systematic evidence suppression. I saved the image to my phone, and Stephanie told me to be careful who I showed it to. As we got ready to leave the water tower, headlights appeared on the access road behind us. Stephanie's face went pale and she looked panicked. I motioned for her to go in a different direction while I led whoever was following us away from her. We split up at the next intersection, her turning left toward town while I went right toward the highway. The headlights followed me. I texted Raphael through the secure app while driving, telling him Stephanie was ready to talk if they could protect her from retaliation. His response came back immediately with an address and instructions for a safe debrief location. I sent the address to Stephanie and told her to go there now. Then I focused on the car behind me, leading it on a route away from where she was heading. I was making decisions to protect her even though she'd betrayed me, because I understood now that she was a victim in this too. The system had used her fear and her love for me to turn her into a weapon, and she'd have to live with that. But she didn't deserve to be hurt anymore for trying to do the right thing, even if she'd done it in the worst possible way. The motel was 15 miles outside town, a place with peeling paint and a neon sign that buzzed too loud. I paid cash for the room and sat on the bed with my phone in my hand, staring at Raphael's last message about where Stephanie was giving her statement. Every part of me wanted to drive there and make sure she was okay, to control what she said and how she said it, but I forced myself to stay put. I turned on the TV and watched nothing, just noise to fill the room while my brain ran through every possible way the debrief could go wrong. Around midnight, I tried to sleep, but ended up lying flat on top of the covers, staring at water stains on the ceiling and listening to traffic on the highway. The restraint felt like holding my breath underwater, fighting against instinct, but I didn't move, and I didn't call anyone, and I didn't do anything stupid. When morning light started coming through the thin curtains, I felt exhausted, but also something else. Maybe the start of understanding that I couldn't fix everything by forcing it. Raphael's office was in a government building downtown with metal detectors at the entrance and hallways that smelled like floor wax and old coffee. Melanie met me in the lobby and we went up together, not talking much, just her reviewing notes on her phone while I tried to keep my hands from shaking. The conference room had a long table and recording equipment set up at one end, and Raphael was already there with folders spread out in front of him. He started the recording and asked me to state my name and confirm I was there voluntarily with my lawyer present, and then he walked me through everything from the beginning. I told him about the fare and the fortune teller and the envelope, about the surveillance I noticed and the cars that followed me, about the traffic stop and what I saw in that photo. I explained the hospital connection through Stephanie and my mom's treatment, the missing tox screen from 3 years ago, the timing delays at the accident scene. Raphael took notes while the recorder ran, stopping me sometimes to ask for more details or to clarify dates, and Melanie sat beside me making sure I didn't say anything that could hurt me later. After 2 hours, we took a break, and then went through the evidence I'd collected, the EMS records and the insurance letters and the photos from the fairground. At the end, Raphael slid papers across the table, immunity agreements that said my statements here couldn't be used against me in most situations, and I signed them with Melanie watching to make sure the language was right. Walking out of that building, I felt like I'd just handed over ammunition that could either save me or blow up in my face, depending on who fired it and when. Raphael called me that afternoon while I was sitting in my apartment trying to eat lunch I couldn't taste. He told me they'd brought Officer Dodson in that morning for what they called a voluntary interview, and Dodson had admitted he followed orders on my traffic stop. The narcotics unit sergeant told him there would definitely be an envelope in my car and that he needed to secure it as evidence, and Dodson did what he was told, because that's what cops do when their supervisor gives them specific intelligence. Dodson said he didn't know anything about Route 67 or any cover-up, thought he was just executing a normal drug interdiction based on reliable information from an ongoing investigation. Raphael said Dodson seemed genuinely surprised when they showed him the accident photo and explained the timeline, like he was realizing for the first time that he'd been used as a tool for something much bigger. Hearing that made my feelings about Dodson shift in ways I didn't expect, moving away from simple anger towards something more complicated. He wasn't some evil cop trying to destroy my life, just another person caught in a system that turns everyone into pieces on a board, moving where they're told without seeing the whole game. Aurora showed up at my door 2 days later with a laptop bag and that sharp look she gets when she's found something good. She spread procurement logs across my kitchen table, pages she'd gotten through a hospital contact who owed her a favor, and walked me through the numbers. Saline solution orders were off by hundreds of units over 6 months. Fentanyl counts showed discrepancies that nobody had flagged, and the timing matched exactly with when my accident happened and when my mom was getting treatment. She'd identified 3 hospital supervisors who had access to both the pharmacy and the lab where specimens got processed, and one of them was Helen Stinson, the same name from that HR complaint I'd found. Aurora pointed to dates and quantities, showing me how the missing supplies lined up with the specimen tampering timeline, and I started seeing the shape of something much bigger than just my case. The hospital wasn't just covering up one accident, they were running a whole operation, and my accident just happened to land right in the middle of it. The evidence was building into something solid, something that showed institutional corruption using real people as cover, and for the first time I felt like we might actually be able to prove what happened instead of just knowing it in my gut. The courthouse was packed the day of my status hearing, people waiting for their cases in wooden benches that creaked every time someone shifted. When my name got called, I walked up with Melanie while the prosecutor stood on the other side looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The judge asked about case progress, and the prosecutor said they were still considering additional charges related to the investigation, making it sound like a threat hanging over my head. Melanie stood up and told the judge about my cooperation agreement, handed over paperwork showing I was working with state investigators, and suggested maybe the prosecution should think carefully about their approach given the circumstances. The judge looked at both of them for a long moment, and then said, "My bail conditions would stay the same," but he was noting my cooperation in the official record. I left the courtroom feeling like I was balanced on a knife edge. Not quite charged with more crimes, but not quite safe either. Just stuck in this weird space between being useful and being prosecuted. The legal system kept grinding forward with its slow mechanical process, but at least I wasn't completely powerless anymore. At least I had some kind of leverage even if I didn't fully understand how to use it. Raphael set up the controlled call 3 days later, in a room at the state police barracks with recording equipment that looked more serious than what we'd used for my proffer. He gave me a script to follow, specific questions designed to get the handler talking about Route 67 and the specimen handling, and I practiced it twice before we dialed the number that had appeared in my call log after the arrest. The phone rang 4 times and then a voice answered, cold and professional, asking who this was and what I wanted. I followed Raphael's script, saying I needed to talk about what happened at the fair and whether we could work something out, and the handler told me I should have kept my mouth shut like I was told. I pushed a little, asking about the cleanup operation and whether it was worth all this trouble, and the handler said something about making sure everything matched the narrative from Route 67. Raphael was writing notes fast while the recording ran, and I kept going, getting the handler to reference specimen handling and making sure the story held together. The whole call lasted maybe 2.5 minutes before the handler realized I was fishing and hung up, but those recorded statements were enough to show criminal conspiracy. I sat there after the call ended, phone still in my hand, feeling like I'd just done something meaningful and dangerous at the same time, and I couldn't tell if that made me brave or just desperate for any kind of control. Stephanie's formal statement came through official channels a week later, typed up and notarized and submitted to the state investigation. Raphael let me read a copy, and I sat in his office going through her account of the pressure tactics they used to get her cooperation, the threats about her nursing license, and the promises that I'd be protected if she just did what they asked. She detailed every conversation about specimen tampering, every instruction she received about steering me toward the fair, every lie they told her about keeping me safe. The statement was clear and detailed, and probably cost her everything professionally, because by the time I finished reading it, Raphael told me the hospital had already suspended her pending their internal investigation. I texted her that night, just saying I was sorry this was hurting her career, and she wrote back that she was actually relieved to finally be honest about everything, even if it meant starting over somewhere else. The guilt sat heavy in my chest, because my investigation was destroying the life she'd built. But she was choosing truth over comfort, and that took a kind of courage I was still learning to recognize. Officer Dodson's deal came together faster than I expected. Raphael telling me that Dodson agreed to testify about the command directives he received in exchange for internal leniency and protection from criminal charges. Raphael arranged for me to see Dodson's written statement, and I read it in the same conference room where I'd given my proffer, seeing a cop who looked exhausted and trapped in every line of text. Dodson described following orders he didn't fully understand, executing stops and seizures based on intelligence he never questioned, and slowly realizing he'd been used as a tool for something corrupt. He admitted he should have asked more questions and pushed back harder, but he trusted the system and his supervisors, and now he had to live with being part of covering up whatever happened at Route 67. Reading his words, I felt something unexpected, not forgiveness exactly, but maybe compassion for another person caught in machinery that grinds people up and spits them out. We were both victims of the same system. Just standing on different sides of it and hating him wouldn't change what happened or fix anything that was broken. Raphael's text came through at 6 in the morning, just 2 words followed by names. Arrests happening. Helen Stinson, narcotics sergeant. I sat up in bed staring at my phone while my brain tried to process what that meant, that the investigation had finally reached the point where people were actually being charged. Raphael said they were doing it quietly without press releases, picking them up at their homes before work, and I should stay inside and keep my doors locked just in case there was any backlash. I spent that whole day in my apartment watching the street through my window, looking for any sign that someone was coming for me next, any car that didn't belong or person who watched too long. The arrests meant we'd reached some kind of critical point where the evidence was strong enough to act on, and I felt relieved that something was finally happening, but also terrified about what came next. Every noise in the hallway made me jump. Every car that slowed down outside made my heart race, and I kept my phone charged and close in case I needed to call for help. The day passed without incident, but the fear stayed sharp, reminding me that this wasn't over, and wouldn't be over until everyone involved was either charged or cleared. The plea negotiations started the following week, Melanie calling me in for meetings where we sat across from prosecutors in rooms that smelled like stale air and tension. They still wanted me to plead guilty to possession, said the evidence was solid, and a jury would convict based on what was in that envelope. But Melanie kept pushing back with my cooperation agreement and all the evidence showing I'd been set up. We spent hours in those conference rooms while lawyers argued about what justice looked like in a case this compromised, whether I should pay for crimes someone else orchestrated, whether my cooperation earned me anything beyond not making things worse. The prosecutors offered deals, and Melanie countered with better ones, and I sat there learning that the legal system isn't about truth or fairness, but about negotiation and leverage, and who has the better cards to play. Melanie was fighting for deferred adjudication, a deal where I'd plead to a reduced charge, but the conviction would be dismissed if I stayed clean and completed conditions, and the prosecutors kept saying that was too generous given what I was arrested with. I was learning to accept that there was no clean win here, no outcome where I walked away vindicated and whole, just degrees of damage control, and hoping the system would be slightly less cruel than it could be. A week later, Aurora texted me with an address for a coffee shop on the east side, telling me 3 families wanted to meet and hear what I knew about Route 67. I drove there with my stomach tight and my hands sweating on the wheel, knowing I couldn't ask them to forgive me or make any of this okay. The coffee shop was small and quiet, and they were already sitting at a back table when I arrived. 3 people who looked tired and sad in ways that never completely go away. I sat down across from them and started talking, laying out everything I'd learned about the accident, and the cover-up and the missing talk screens and the evidence tampering, answering their questions as honestly as I could without making excuses or trying to minimize what happened. They listened without interrupting much, and when I finished, the older woman whose brother died asked why the police never contacted them about any of this, and I told her I didn't know, but I was trying to find out. The younger man asked if I was drunk that night, and I said I don't think so, but my talk screen was destroyed, so there's no proof either way, and I saw him process that answer with a look that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't acceptance either. We sat there for almost an hour while I answered every question they had, and when we finally stood up to leave, none of them thanked me or said it was okay, but the older woman nodded once, like maybe sharing the truth mattered, even if it couldn't undo anything. I drove home feeling like I'd done something important without fixing anything, which seemed about right for where I was in all this. 2 days later, I went to Stephanie's apartment to pick up a book I'd left there months ago, and I found the place empty with a note taped to the inside of the door. The note said she was cooperating fully with the investigation and wouldn't contact me until her case was done, and she hoped I understood that what we had ended the moment she handed me that envelope, even though we both pretended otherwise for a while. I read it twice standing in her empty living room, then folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket, accepting that some things break and don't get fixed no matter how much you want them to. Back home, I put the note in my desk drawer under some old bills, not throwing it away but not keeping it out either, just letting it exist as a record of something that happened and ended. The following week, I had a status hearing at the courthouse, and I was standing in the hallway outside the courtroom when Officer Dodson came around the corner and stopped when he saw me. He looked different in civilian clothes, younger and less sure of himself, and he walked over slowly like he wasn't certain this was a good idea. He stood there for a second, not quite making eye contact, then said quietly that he shouldn't have done it like that, and he was sorry. His apology was simple and probably not enough for what happened, but I nodded at him without saying it was okay because I wasn't ready to forgive him and he wasn't really asking me to. We just stood there for a moment, acknowledging that something bad happened between us, and then he walked away, and I went into the courtroom for my hearing. At my plea hearing 2 weeks later, I stood before the judge while Melanie explained the agreement we'd reached with the prosecution. The judge asked if I understood the terms, and I said yes, that I'd plead guilty to a reduced charge of possession of a controlled substance, complete 1 year of drug education classes, and 200 hours of community service, and continue cooperating with ongoing investigations into the Route 67 cover-up. The judge told me that if I stayed clean and fulfilled all conditions for 2 years, the charge would be dismissed from my record and sealed, but if I violated any terms, I'd face the original charges plus additional penalties. I accepted the terms standing there in my borrowed suit, understanding this wasn't vindication or proof of innocence, but just survival, the best outcome I could hope for given everything that happened. The judge signed the order and set my first check-in date for 3 weeks later, and I walked out of the courthouse with Melanie feeling relieved and exhausted, and still carrying all the weight of what I'd learned. The press story broke the next morning while I was drinking coffee and checking my phone. The headline focused on corruption in the narcotics unit and hospital procurement, with names like Helen Stinson and the narcotics sergeant featured prominently, and my name appeared once in a paragraph about ongoing cases but without any details or photo. I read through the article twice, feeling grateful that I wasn't the face of this scandal, that I could move forward without everyone knowing my story or having opinions about what happened. The article mentioned ongoing investigations and hinted at more arrests coming, but the focus stayed on institutional failures and systemic problems rather than individual victims, which felt like mercy I didn't expect. I closed my phone and finished my coffee, accepting that anonymity was its own kind of gift when you just wanted to rebuild your life quietly. I started therapy the following week at a sliding scale clinic that charged based on income, meeting with a woman who specialized in trauma and legal stress. Over the next several weeks, I talked about the accident and the paranoia of being watched, and the complicated feelings about everyone involved, and she helped me understand that healing wasn't about forgetting or forgiving everyone, but about processing what happened and learning to function despite the scars. The sessions were hard, sitting in her small office and talking through things I'd spent 3 years avoiding, but I kept showing up every Thursday afternoon because I knew I needed help carrying all this. She gave me exercises for managing anxiety and helped me identify patterns in my thinking that made everything worse, and slowly I started feeling less like I was drowning and more like I was just swimming in deep water. Several weeks into my community service, I drove out to Route 67 on a Saturday morning with a small bunch of flowers from the grocery store. I parked on the shoulder where the accident happened 3 years ago, and I walked to the spot where the memorial crosses stood, marking where 3 people died. I didn't make speeches or promises, just stood there quietly for 10 minutes holding the flowers and acknowledging that those lives ended while mine continued, and I'd never fully understand why. The gesture felt respectful without being performative, something I needed to do for them, and for myself, and when I finally laid the flowers at the base of the crosses and walked back to my car, I didn't feel absolved, but I felt like I'd honored something important. I drove away slowly, checking my mirror one last time at the spot before it disappeared behind the trees. That evening, I sat on my couch and went through my phone, deleting all the surveillance photos I'd taken of license plates and following cars and people watching me at the fair. I kept only Raphael's contact information saved under attorney in case I needed it for the ongoing investigation, but everything else I removed, letting go of the evidence I'd collected when I thought I had to control every aspect of this situation. Deleting the photos felt like choosing to stop living in constant defense mode, trusting that the legal process would continue without me having to document and verify everything myself. I was setting boundaries around what I'd carry forward into whatever came next, and what I'd leave behind as part of a chapter that was closing, even if it wasn't completely finished. Months later, I was driving home from my community service shift when I passed the county fairground and saw crews packing up after another season. The empty spaces where tents used to be looked ordinary now, just grass, and dirt with no watchers or handlers or fortune tellers in sight, and I kept driving toward home instead of stopping at the water tower like I used to when I needed to think. When I pulled into my parking space, I felt calm instead of hunted, noticing the blue sedan was gone and no one was tracking my movements anymore. The investigation continued somewhere without me at its center. Stephanie was rebuilding her life in another city, and I was learning to exist in a world where the truth came out. But didn't fix everything. Where accountability happened but didn't erase what was broken. Where I could acknowledge what happened without letting it define every moment going forward, and somehow that was enough. That's the full breakdown. I love sharing stories that actually help you think or see something new. If even one part of this clicked, that's a win. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one we dig into.